Hi, I'm Phil Simpkins. This is Seed Your Startup, an engineer's guide to bring creative ideas to market. So we've been talking about the Seeds concept, we've talked about Spark, and we've talked about Investigate. Now we're going to talk about the concept Experiment. So what is it about experiment? First, we talked about the concept what, so we're defining what we want to accomplish, how we want to do it, what are alternatives available, and how we're going to test it. So this concept and experiment, we actually want to define a prototype to show your potential customers. We're actually going to be going out and talking to folks who might buy your product to make sure they understand what you want to accomplish, and you show that in pictures, either by a prototype or building an actual event or some type of slide PowerPoint that shows them what you're trying to get across. So try different kind of concepts to build your product and basically give folks that feeling of that. So we're going to use the information we wrote in our lean canvas and use some statistics behind it. We want to see how many people we talk to, what their feelings are, and what their ideas around what we're trying to build. We want to use some metrics. Again, don't get too detailed. It's about sales, so let's focus on the sales side. There are some risks for doing business. One of the key risks is, will somebody buy it? Which is why we're doing this market research. So understand some of the things we're working at, and of course, take notes, try different things, ask different questions, evolve as you're talking to people, but basically take all the information that you can, because this is an experiment and we want to find out what people think. So here's another process sheet for Seed Your Startup. We start with the problem. We need to define the solutions that we're going to solve for the customers that we're working with. So again, it's a little small, but I'll put out a downloadable PDF so that you can take a closer look and use this as a worksheet or a guide to establish these concepts. So let's talk about these real quick. The using of this particular sheet is to work from right to left. So we want to understand our space, understand some of the risks we're dealing with, figure out how we're going to mitigate those risks or resolve them, who we want to talk to, some of the interfaces, and then start developing those concepts for the MVP. So let's talk about understanding your space. What's currently being done out there? What do you know about the environment that you're going into? And basically, who are your competitors? Who's the major one? There's about 2 or 3 that own 80% of the market. So we need to understand who the biggest competitors are and whether you want to do the same things they're doing or do things a little bit different. Again, that plays into risks, right? It's not as risky to do the same thing, but you won't distinguish yourself as much. So we need to understand the impact of that risk. So risks are just what might happen as you're developing your product, and the impact of that risk is how difficult will that be, right? Is it going to completely kill your project if this risk happens? Is everything going to shut down, right? And depending on how risky the risk is, we're going to use some type of risk mitigation, right? Do we just accept it because it's a small risk, or do we have to do something to figure out how to get rid of that risk? Risks come and go, they're big or small, but just to understand what you need to do in that environment, just to have a discussion will actually help, because you're going to find that the biggest risks are the ones that are going to take your biggest time. They're the most difficult to mitigate. They're the ones that you need to absorb. They're the ones that are going to impact you the most. So understand what might cause problems in your project. So to help with that, we're going to be working with people. So who do you need on your project? Who do you need help from? who do you need to talk to, find folks that you need, what type of interactions do you want from them. I call it interfaces, but it's basically your network of people that you're working with on the project and who you're going to need to interact with. In one case, is it a doctor? The Mind Length project that I'm working with, we need to work with psychologists and connect those to the people that need them. So we need to be interfacing with psychologists. So here we want to define a prototype. What do you want to show your users to give them an understanding of what you want to bring to market? Is it just a picture frame? Is it just a PDF? Is it an actual product that they can hold in their hand? I've actually created what I call the ding mat. It needed to be built for people to understand the concepts of storing an item between cars to make sure you don't get dents, right? That needed to be developed so that they had an idea. Other prototypes can be as easy as just showing pictures about what you want your app to look like and the type of information you're going to gather. But you need to show those concepts to folks to show them what you're working on. So we need to understand our product concepts, how we're going to build it, what we're going to do, what type of coding we may use for an app, or what color it needs to be. Just understand some of those concepts about your product. And again, remember, we're trying to build an MVP. So we also want to validate our market so that we know we're building something of value. So we need to test that market a little bit. We need to understand who's buying and who is interested in buying, what your app or idea might accomplish. So we are also, we will discuss development later, right? We need to understand the concept of MVP. So we'll bring that idea in the bottom left in our next stage in our process. But to develop your MVP, we need to do some brainstorming. We need to understand the alternatives that are out there. And remember that there actually are no bad alternatives in the brainstorming stage. We want to build on the capabilities that we're talking about and build on the ideas that we bring forward so that when we list an idea or a concept, we're just having a discussion about that concept to see what we can add to that. Now, we do want to analyze our alternatives eventually, but in the brainstorming, we just kind of let the concepts and thoughts flow and actually save the analyzing for a different stage and define that purpose and a different discussion in that concept. So analyzing them, we do want to test, we want to discuss, we need to want to know what the users are going to be used and see what the alternatives that they liked. And from the analysis of alternatives, we're going to decide on an MVP. But that's based on the requirements that we need. It's based on what viewed most within the user's perspective and see what alternatives resonated best with those users. So this is our understanding within our experimentation. It looks like a lot of work, but they all build on each other, right? We need to understand our space. We need to understand the risks. We need to help build a prototype so that we can then come to our ultimate MVP by bringing that to the market and talking with our customers.